Today we're going to talk about how to tie the Agura. My name's Lazarus Redmayne, and this is TheDuchy.com. Today we're going to go over how to tie a simple Agura, not suitable for suspension. The Agura is basically a method for tying your partner into a cross-legged position. It features either a single or a double column around the ankles, some method for holding the legs closed in this position. I'll show you a couple different versions of that. It also includes a loop around the waist to keep your partner in a seated position. While you do have a choice of using a double or a single column down here on the ankles, most of the time when I see this tied, it's tied with a single column, and I always choose a single column because it gives my partner a little bit more opportunity to move around and adjust as they're in bondage and allows them to wear the Agura a little longer. Now I'm going to choose a traditional square knot single column for this tie. But I'm going to take my bite and I'm going to run it down between my partner's legs and their body this way first, and you'll see why at the end. I'm going to pull up enough to go around my partner's ankles once, twice, and let's actually add a little bit more there so we can go around a third time. I do this so that this band of rope is a little bit wider and therefore a little bit more comfortable for long-term wear. All right, so give yourself enough lead to work. Run the bite underneath all of the strands like this. Pull up to get some tension in the rope as you're tying the rest. Then this is the tail of the rope. Then take the tail, grip it, and make a loop like this. And then grab the bite, pull it through, and tighten. Now this has made that square knot shape and tighten that quite firmly. Now you have that single column. And now you can see why I chose to put my bite down this direction first before I did my wraps, because now the tail is naturally leading up toward my partner's legs. Now step 2 of the Agura is to lock the legs together in some fashion. The first common way is to just create a band around the upper thigh and the ankle. So we can take our tail, run it around the upper part of our partner's thigh, and then down around their leg. And you have a choice now of either capturing the foot, like here if I wrap around right there, I've captured this foot right here. This will give your partner a stronger feeling of helplessness, but this is also a strand of rope across the top of your foot. And the top of your foot is quite sensitive, so this can become painful quite quickly. So another option is to skip the foot altogether and run it between your partner's foot and leg like this, so that you are not capturing the foot, but you're just capturing the leg. In this case, I'm just going to go around the foot and then back up and then do a second wrap. You could do a third wrap if you so choose. Adjust your tensions. Then lay your tail across the incoming line, hook the tail, and pull it through. Then cross the tail over top of itself, like that, and hook it through and under, like this. Take a moment and adjust the lay of your lines. Now you have a choice as to how to run this tail. You can take this tail and run it straight back around your partner's back, or you can run it across and around. I typically run it straight back from here just because it makes this grip quite a bit more strong. So now I'm going to run this tail across my partner's back. While you're doing this, you have the opportunity to adjust how tight that is pulling into your partner, and you're putting some tension across their back to help keep them in a seated position, so they can't flex their legs down too far. So you can choose how tight you make this rear band. We'll also come back at the end of our tie if we have rope left over and put some more wraps around the stomach in order to maintain that seated posture if we desire. So now we have our rope on the other side of our partner's body, and again we do our wrap. I'm going to just wrap around the legs again, and again you have the choice. Are you going to go around the foot, or are you going to skip the foot and go around the leg itself? Well, since I did the foot on the other side, I'm going to do the foot on this side as well. And I have run out of rope, so I'll grab a new rope and add some more by creating a lark's head and then running my knots through that lark's head. Because I have knots at the end, I can just grab the lark's head straight onto those knots and continue on. They actually fall at a pretty decent place. If I didn't have knots, I could back that lark's head off and fold it over to create a reef knot or a square knot. You could see that alternate technique in that tutorial. So now that I have my rope extended, I'm ready to proceed. Now I want to make sure that this junction is not lying on any place to be particularly sensitive. If that knot was lying on the shin, for example, or the bottom of the foot, that would become really painful really fast. So we want to make sure it's not lying on any place like that. I really like where it is here, or maybe underneath the leg where it's in this gap, so it's not going to be pressing on my partner's skin. If it's going to be pressing someplace that's going to be painful, then just artificially move it and use the alternative way of doing rope extension instead. All right, so now we continue wrapping, making our strands parallel and having even tension. Bring them back over, lay it across the incoming line, hook the tail, pull that tail through, then lay the tail across itself right here and underneath that incoming line again like this. Now, make sure these knots are lying approximately the same place. They are, so we're good to go there. Now bring the tail down and run it underneath that single column cuff that you began with, like this. Then adjust your tension so that you have even tension and length in both sides. Now, depending on how much rope you have left over, you're going to end this in a variety of ways. If you're very close to the end, lock this off with a half hitch or however you prefer to lock it off, and just use up the rope by winding it around. But if you have a little bit more, one of the fastest ways to use up rope is to wind it around your partner's waist. But before I do that, I'm going to lock this node off a little bit more. Right now, it's just a simple half hitch. So I'm going to lay my tail over top of that incoming line and underneath the single column one more time, like that, before I proceed. Now I have my tail. I'm going to wrap it around my partner's waist, like this, and then come back to itself. I'm almost out of rope, so I'm not going to be able to do more than one wrap around my partner's waist. Well, reach under the incoming line, grab itself, and adjust that tension so things lay nicely. And now lock that off with a stronger friction by going under the center line and then over top of the outgoing line one more time, like that. So you now got a good strong friction. That's how you would do it even if you had multiple wraps. You just make sure that this whole friction was around all those wraps. I'll show you that when we do the second version of this in a minute. And then you have a little bit of rope left over. Just run it around your center line here, like that. Now you're close to the end here. If you had a little bit more, you could come down and hook it into some of this stuff and tighten all this down. You could connect it in down here. I don't have enough to do that, so all I'm going to do, because I have knots at the end, I'm just going to continue winding and then tuck it in between these two tightened strands. That will hold. If you don't have knots, lock it off with a half hitch or however else you prefer. So I'm just going to continue on. And now I've pretty much run out of rope. So I'm going to split those center lines and tuck those knots at the end of my rope between the center line, like that. And that will hold just fine. So this is one method of doing a simple Agura. Again, not suitable for suspension, but great for keeping your partner in a cross-legged position. Now I'm going to back all of this stuff out back to the original single column and then show you an alternative way of doing the legs. So here we are, almost all the way back to the beginning. We've got our single column in place, but we haven't done any of the legs. An alternative way of doing the legs, which distributes the force across a larger area, is to use a reverse tension technique. So take your first wrap it quite close to your partner's thighs, and then around their legs. Again, you can choose to skip the foot or keep the foot in place. But when you come to the center line, hook the tail underneath that center line and pull it through. Then reverse the tension at that point and go around the opposite direction, keeping some spacing between those wraps. Bring the tail around again, and again go underneath that most recent wrap. That. Reverse your tension again. Choose your spacing. Then reverse one more time. Come to your center line again, like that. Now, Depending on your partner and depending on your choices, you may have 2, you may have 3, you may have 4. 3 is usually a pretty decent number on a lot of people, but if your partner's tall or small, then maybe you'll need something else. Now we need something to help maintain this spacing. So we are going to take the tail and wrap it around that leg stem, bringing it back down to this point. So before I do that, I want to lock this off by running it underneath the incoming line like that. And now I'm just going to wrap around that center stem, maybe 2 or 3 times until I get to the next node. Now when you get to a node like this, to cross that node, just go from one quadrant to the opposite quadrant, sort of crossing behind that node like this. That will keep the wrap looking nice and clean without being kludgy like it would if you went around one of these lines. Then you just continue wrapping around the next one. Then just continue wrapping around the next one. Adjusting your wraps as you go. It may be that you get to one of these nodes in a perfect place to go around the front of it. That's okay. You're just doing from one quadrant to the next quadrant. Well, now we're back here to our starting point, and we can continue on bringing the rope back around our partner's back. But we're pretty much out of rope, so we're going to extend it again. Creating my lark's head, slipping it over my knots. And this junction here is in a pretty good location. This is not going to be in a place where it pushes very strongly against our partner's body and causes unplanned discomfort. So it's a good spot. So now to continue the tie with this leg. Now, you could come straight down like this and start to do your reverses in this direction, but I find that that is a little more challenging because the way this rope lies, this first reverse really doesn't grab very well. So in this case, before continuing on, I'm going to come back and hook into this one and then come back. It makes this side a lot more stable and easy to tie. So just kind of come back around, hook the tail through, give yourself a little space to work, and then begin the tie over here. This kind of gives you a much better angle. And you can also see it's added a little more tension here, holding all of this into the body a little bit more. All right, well now we continue to repeat over here what we did over there. And again, you could choose to go across your partner's foot or skip your partner's foot and just go on the leg itself. I'm just going to do the foot in this case. So come through, then hook under the line you started with, pull back out, reverse your tension, choose your spacing, hook your line, pull it through, one more time. So now we have all of these reverses, we have our spacing here, and we're ready to bring the line back down to the middle. All right, so again, we cross over that line to hold it in place, and then begin wrapping the opposite direction. The rope's quite a bit longer here since I've just added some, so the tail pulls take a little bit longer to do. And in this case, I get to this node at an angle where I'm going to put the wrap in the front, like that, and then hook behind the next line. So I'm back to my starting point, and I want to start balancing some tensions. You can see this is kind of pulled off to that side. But I want to lock it around this incoming line one more time first so that it holds this in place a bit better before I continue on. So I'm just going to wrap it around there, and I'll add one more here. This is optional. I do that just so I've added kind of a little bit of an X friction here, holding this line better in place coming into this leg. Now come back to your original single column and add some tension to that, bringing it back to the middle. So now we're largely done with this version of it. I have maybe a meter of rope left over. If you only have a little bit of rope left over, you can just lock this off using whatever technique works well for you. But since I have a little bit left over, I'm going to use it up by wrapping it around my partner's waist. I'm going to lock this off first by taking my tail, running it across the incoming line and back underneath the center line one more time. So we have a really good grip on that center line. And now I'm going to wrap it around my partner's torso. I don't have enough to wrap around twice, so I will stop here. So here's my tail. Here's where we started that last waist wrap. I want to catch that line and hook it into this waistline. So I'm going to put my fingers through here, underneath that hole, hook the tail, pull the tail up to this point, like this. Now I'll catch all the lines on this side, run it across the back, catch all the lines on this side, then bring it down to the middle and wrap it around that center line right there. You could wrap around all three lines like this, depending how much tension you have. If you want to add tension or stability, you can do that. I like how this tension is lying right now, so I'm just going to wrap it around here. Just wrapping it around that center line, adjusting the lay of the wraps as we go. And when you're just out of rope, tie it off however makes sense to you. I have knots in the bottom of my rope, so I will tuck some of those knots in between some tight strands, which will hold them in place. If you don't, then you can use half hitches or other techniques to hold those knots in place. Now, let's double check where these strands are laying. Get them in the place we want. Check how the bands are lying on our partner's skin where you have straps. Make sure they are laying as straps. And there you go, a second method of doing a simple Agura. Now, one thing about this version is we really don't have anything here on the bottom holding the underside of these lines into our partner. So if your partner has the freedom of movement or the flexibility, one method of messing with this particular tie is to get this first band popped up off the knee, and then everything sort of collapses. So this one looks really neat, but it's not super secure. So here it is, another method of doing a simple Agura. My name's Lazarus Redmayne. This is TheDuchy.com. We hope you learned a little something, and as always, thank you for your support.